What happens when mischief, family tension, and the sharp wit of Disick collide with the high-powered authority of Kris Jenner? Imagine a moment where Khloé Kardashian, known for her humor and boldness, joins forces with Disick, the self-proclaimed Lord Disick, to craft a plan so outrageous, so daring that it could only be called art revenge. It wasn't just a prank. It was a carefully staged moment of rebellion, laughter, and retaliation. But the question remained. In a house where Kris Jenner ruled with iron discipline disguised as polished charm, how would she react when her own children and surrogate son turned her world into a gallery of chaos? The atmosphere in Calabasas was deceptively calm on the morning it all began. The Kardashian-Jenner compound, usually buzzing with cameras, assistants, and the faint hum of phone calls orchestrating empires, was still. Yet underneath, tension brewed. Kris Jenner had been on a streak of control, micromanaging every project, every headline, every family appearance. For Khloé Kardashian, who often tried to balance her mother's intensity with her own sense of individuality, the time felt right to push back. And who better to partner with than Disick, a man who thrived on chaos, humor, and making Kris lose her famously composed cool. Scott had always been the prankster, the one unafraid to poke holes in the glamorous facade. He'd lived as both insider and outsider of the Kardashian family, adored and criticized, but always ready to challenge Kris Jenner's authority. This wasn't just about pulling a simple trick. To him, this was theater. This was art. And when Khloé agreed, the idea of art revenge was born. The plot was simple in theory but outrageous in execution. Transform Kris Jenner's carefully curated mansion into an impromptu gallery of absurdity. Every hallway, every pristine wall, every perfectly placed sculpture would be reimagined through their eyes. They commissioned bizarre portraits, Kris Jenner's face painted onto surreal Renaissance bodies, exaggerated caricatures of her orchestrating puppet strings attached to her children, even a massive canvas of her sipping wine atop a throne labeled Queen of Calabasas. To Scott and Khloé, it was satire. To Kris, it would feel like betrayal. The day of the prank began with whispers. The cameras rolled as Khloé distracted her mother with errands, pulling her into meetings and phone calls while Scott oversaw the installation of the art. Hired movers carried in oversized frames, swapping out Kris's minimalist black and white photography for loud, golden-framed parodies. Marble tables were adorned with statues that looked suspiciously like Kris, but with crowns, capes, and even devil horns, depending on which room one entered. It was bold, it was brazen, and above all, it was deeply personal. By late afternoon, the house was unrecognizable. What had once been Kris Jenner's temple of order now resembled a carnival of critique. Scott, packing with restless excitement, couldn't stop grinning. "She's gonna lose it," he whispered, knowing full well that the woman who managed billion-dollar brands and controlled every narrative despised being made the punchline. Khloé, suppressing laughter, prepared herself for impact. This wasn't just rebellion. It was revenge wrapped in humor, a way to remind Kris that her grip could never be absolute. When Kris finally returned home, the silence before the storm was almost cinematic. She stepped through the doors, her heels clicking across the marble, phone still pressed to her ear. The first painting caught her eye, and she froze mid-sentence. Slowly, her gaze traced the exaggerated lines of her own face painted onto the body of a medieval monarch. Confusion turned to shock, and shock to anger. "What is this?" Her voice echoed through the hallway, sharp enough to cut the air. Khloé emerged from the corner, barely able to keep her composure. Scott, of course, was filming on his phone, capturing every flicker of Kris Jenner's expression. "It's Art Kris," Scott announced dramatically, waving his arm toward the gallery of parody. "Welcome to your very own exhibit. We call it Art Revenge." The reaction was everything they hoped for and feared. Kris's face flushed crimson as she moved from frame to frame, each piece worse than the last in her eyes. She demanded explanations, threatening to call in staff to undo the madness immediately. Khloé tried to soften the blow with laughter, framing it as a joke, a moment of family fun. But Kris Jenner was not amused. To her, this wasn't humor, it was humiliation. The cameras caught every second, Kris pointing at Scott, her voice rising, her tone oscillating between disbelief and fury. "You think this is funny? You come into my house, you take my space, and you turn it into a mockery." Her words carried the weight of a woman who built an empire on image, control, and precision. Scott, unflinching, delivered his signature smirk. "Exactly. Because sometimes, Kris, you need to see yourself the way the rest of us see you." The room fell silent. Khloé, suddenly caught between laughter and guilt, realized just how far the prank had gone. This wasn't just a family joke anymore. It was an emotional dagger aimed directly at the matriarch's pride. For Kris Jenner, the so-called art revenge felt like betrayal. She had spent decades crafting her role not only as a mother, but as the manager, the architect, the mastermind of a dynasty. To see her children and Scott, her once trusted ally, turn her into a caricature tested the fragile line between family and business, between love and authority. The following hours blurred between confrontation and reconciliation. Scott defended the prank as harmless fun, insisting it was a way of keeping life light amidst the constant pressures of fame. Khloé echoed him, but more cautiously, her heart torn between loyalty to her mother and the thrill of rebellion. Kris, however, remained unsettled. She paced the house, her eyes lingering on each portrait as though staring into distorted mirrors of her own influence. And yet beneath the fury there was something else, a reluctant acknowledgement of the truth. The art, however exaggerated, reflected what Kris Jenner knew but never admitted, that her control, her image, her power were as much a performance as they were reality. That sometimes, to her children and those closest to her, she wasn't just Momager Kris. She was a monarch, untouchable, unreachable, and overwhelming. The episode of Khloé and Scott Disick prank Kris Jenner with art revenge became a spectacle of its own. Fans debated endlessly. Was Kris overreacting, or had Khloé and Scott crossed the line? Some saw it as harmless laughter, proof that even in the world's most famous family, pranks and rebellion had a place. Others viewed it as cruel, a reminder that beneath the luxury and the staged smiles, real emotions were at stake. In the end, Kris Jenner did what she always does. She turned chaos into content, outrage into opportunity. The prank might have shaken her, but it also reminded the world why the Kardashian-Jenner empire endures. Because no matter how explosive, dramatic, or painful the family drama becomes, it's always captured, always transformed, always part of the story. Khloé Kardashian's laughter, Scott Disick's smirk, and Kris Jenner's fiery reaction now live forever as one of those unforgettable moments. A prank born of frustration, rebellion, and humor became something greater. A mirror held up to the dynamics of power, love, and revenge inside America's most famous family. Because in Calabasas, even art isn't safe from becoming a weapon. And when Khloé and Scott plotted their art revenge, they did more than prank Kris Jenner. They exposed the cracks in her empire, reminding her, and the world, that control is never absolute.